Good morning in the UK. Yes, it's morning this time. I have a UK guest. Yes, no time zones, no time zones. Welcome to Inception Podcast Special. Today I have an amazing guest, Charles Christian. I will get back to him in a second. But first of all, I'd like to say, you know where to go. Forbidden Knowledge News Network to find amazing podcasts, amazing shows, conscious expanding, controversy, anything. There's something for everybody on the Forbidden Knowledge News Network. And you'll find me there with Inception Podcast and Inception Special. So without further ado, I have my auto cue, guys. As you know, memory is not too good at the moment. So this morning I have Charles Christian, who is a writer, a barrister, a journalist, an editor, a storyteller of weird tales for weird times. Welcome to the show, Charles.
Oh, my delight to be here, Gloria.
Brilliant, brilliant. So we're just going to get down with it, and I'm going to say, where did your amazing journey begin?
Ooh, I think it began in my childhood. I grew up in the 1950s, time when we only had one channel on television. It was in black and white.
Yes.
And we all stood up at the end of cinema movies to listen to God Save the Queen. Yeah. Strange times by modern comparisons, and
Absolutely.
Strange times by what happened a decade later with the 60s that came along.
Absolutely.
But, I suppose it starts, was brought up in an old house by the harbour side in Scarborough, which for people who don't know is on the northeast coast of Yorkshire. And it was a very old house. Parts of it were medieval, and then there was a Georgian bit built on the front. Mm-hmm. When we had very high tides, the cellars would flood from the sea. We were that close to the harbour. Mm-hmm. And funnily enough, the place is still standing, amazingly, given all the weather that's happened to it now, but no longer in my family. But it was the family home, and it had the family legends, and it was, I'd say, spooky. A friend of my mother's, who reckoned she was a bit of a medium, had skills that way, said she could detect the sound of large boots marching around, hear the sound through the ceiling. And what, with a bit of scratching of the heads, because it was originally my father's house, my mother moved there when she married him, his granny, back in the days of fishing boats and small ships, would take in any sailors who were caught by the storm and didn't have anywhere to stay. And fishermen in those days wore great big thigh-high wading boots and heavy boots of various sorts. And so the idea, the thought was that this medium friend was actually picking up the sound of their boots marching around 50, 100 years later after the events had happened.
Sorry to interrupt, but I've got to say, how did you, as a young child, sort of take that in? And was your father, your mother, were they open to this as well?
My father, I think, was a lifelong skeptic. My mother definitely believed in weird things, for want of a better term, the paranormal. And she came from a strange family, of a sort of matriarchal family, where all the men, the husbands, had either died, been divorced,
Yes.
vanished. And so it was this, never ever was a grandfather mentioned or any men mentioned in the family.
I like or vanished.
Yes.
we would say today under the patio, but however, just vanished. Oh, wonderful. Do go on.
And so I say there was this strong matriarchal line going through, and various tales that they passed down. And I say, when I was a child, my granny was still alive, and her mother, my great grandmother, was still alive, and she was a sort of connection back into the mid-19th century, and she had her tales from her mother and so on. So we had this link going back into a long way. And there were, various tales of, one of the grannies being out in her backyard doing some washing, and a former boyfriend of hers came by. He was an old man by then, and sort of said, "Hello, Jenny, how are you getting on?" And sort of nodded, and she said, "Fine," and he wandered off. And she then learned that was almost the precise moment he died in hospital. And, had he been making his last calls to say his goodbyes to people. And they were, I think with the grannies, they were quite down-to-earth people. They weren't fanciful. I mean, I remember when we used to watch horror movies on TV, Frankenstein and things like that. My grandmother would be saying, "There's no need to be frightened, because the other side of that monster, there's a camera crew, there's somebody with a tea stall, there's somebody making sandwiches, there's a makeup person." There's
what? I used to say that to my children when they were young. I mean, because I would allow them to watch like Vincent Price and things like that, the old scary ones. And I would sit there and say exactly the same.
Yeah.
Exactly. That's weird. It must be a generational thing that passes down. That's weird.
It must be a woman thing, I think, because I think it's...
Oh, yeah.
I think it's
men
a
woman thing, but we won't digress there, okay? Let's pull it back. You go on.
And so they were all very practical. So they weren't the sort of people, and I think we've all encountered them, who the moment they hear the central heating pipes creaking in the morning, it's, "Oh, there's something in the attic, it's a spirit," or whatever. Or the moment you see a plane fly over late at night, that's a UFO. They were very grounded, I think the phrase was. So when they would come out with phrases like that and things like that, you took more notice of it than you might do otherwise, that somebody who was always seeing ghosts and hearing.
Absolutely. So that must have really set you in your foundation to where you eventually ended up, because in that environment where it's a natural phenomena, it's hard to say that word in the morning. It's resonate. They've normalized it for you. There's no spooky action at a distance, like i.e. horror film. Don't worry, there's a camera. So it's like normalized. So I think what in an environment like that, what it does, it drops the fear factor. There's still going to be a few, when you do experience a paranormal experience, there's going to be, "Ooh, what's that?" However, and it normalizes it. Would you say that was true with you? It sort of set you in stone to where you would be going eventually?
I think it did. I mean, there was a strange incident that recurred throughout the time I used to live in what would be my childhood home. And it would be this sensation when I was lying in bed that somebody was getting the bottom of the bed. These were the beds with the sort of headboard at one end and a footboard at the other end of it, that someone was grabbing the footboard of my bed and shaking it. So I was going backwards and forwards. And obviously I looked and there was nobody there. And I did once mention it to my father, and he said, "Oh, it's just the wind catching the house." And that made sense because the seafront did get the wind and the house actually stood out from the rest of the property line.
Yeah.
So if there was a strong gale coming along, it would catch the house. However, it was only many, many years later that it dawned on me that if that was true, the way my bedroom was laid out, I would have been shaken from side to side.
Mm-hmm.
The house, the wind would have hit the side of the house, and it would have shaken my bed that way. It wouldn't have shaken it backwards and forwards. So I've never quite been able to work out what happened then. And I just wonder whether there was something going on. But
Well,
again, with as we were saying, you know, there's the cameraman there behind the monster. Your father says, "Oh, it's just the wind hitting the house." And you think, yeah, it's just the wind hitting the house.
At the time, but yeah, when you look back, I suppose with maturity and research and more experiential paranormal moments, and you start to piece it together. I mean, coming from, you know, me hearing the story, coming from my truth, being a psychic medium, I would say, no, they were there. They were just letting you know they were there. No harm to you, but we're here. And you've never forgotten the experience, which really is quite poignant that you haven't forgotten it. It's a connection that you keep adding to parts of the puzzle. So, yeah, I don't think it was a bit.
Yeah, it definitely, I you know, even sitting here now, I can recall the sensation of the bed just shaking, you know. So, you know, there was that element of it. And I suppose the other factor that was important, I mentioned at the very outset, we lived in primitive times with only one television channel, was that, you know, to use the corny phrase, we made our own entertainment. The TV used to shut down at 10 o'clock or something like that. And so we were great ones for reading. My father would read any book whatsoever. My mother would, you know, again, it was the great days of the public library, and you know, we'd stagger back with the maximum number of books we could have and consume them all. And it was also a time when in winter we'd sit around the fire, and these were, you know, open coal fires, sit around the fire, you know, eating nuts, drinking cups of tea and coffee and whatever. And people would tell stories, and they would tell ghost stories, and they would tell tales of this nature. And, you know, it's very much the older approach, you know, particularly say Christmas, we'd have friends round and you'd all gather around the fire and tell tales. And you just, as a child, obviously I said nothing because I didn't have anything particular much to add, but I was always a great listener. I've always found it fascinating to listen to people. I'd rather listen to people than talk to them. You know, you just pick up these stories. So I suppose we lived still in an oral age, and it was oral history that was being passed down.
Would you say when you say oral history, like, but oral, it's a hard word to say as well in the morning, oral community history, like, you know, culture history. It's not the history we're talking about that's in the history book, so to speak, but it's about the area geographically where you live, about other humans' experiences with these ghosts or these entities. So for me, that is more richer, because it's like if you're with family members and they're sharing, oh my God, when I was 16, it's more rich. It's more, I think it more resonates because it's a loved one or family member or a neighbor. Because back in the day, and we are from the same era, it was a small knit community, which really was an extended family community. Does that make sense to you? So the richness of these tales that you were being shared with you were not just out of a book of whatever. It was a living history, so to speak. Would you agree with that?
Oh, definitely. Lots of stuff that wasn't in any, you'd never find in any of the history books.
Yeah.
And, again, they frequently went off into the macabre. I mean, my grandmother, again, one of those tales logged in my memory as, with hindsight, what a bizarre thing to tell a child. But I was going out one day on my bike, and I was heading off to the outskirts of Scarborough, where it meets the Yorkshire moors and becomes rural very quickly. I was going out there, and I picked up an apple to take with me in my saddlebag. And my grandmother said, "Oh, where are you going?" And I told her the location, and said, "Oh, and you're taking an apple. That reminds me of a story I heard."
Wow.
Sort of, all baited. And the story was that during the First World War, which I suppose for my grandmother she would have been a teenager stroke early 20s. So it was, if you like, a defining time in her life. Said a friend of her brother's came home from leave and went out for a walk one day and was never seen again. And they thought he'd, run away, gone absent without leave from the army, but thought it was a bit unlikely. It wasn't really in his character. And nothing was heard or seen of him again until years later. Somebody was going for a hike through this particular wood where I was about to go on my bicycle, and spotted an apple tree growing halfway up a hill. And he could see it was a proper apple tree as opposed to a crab apple tree. So he thought he'd clamber up to look at it. And when he got there was an apple tree, but it was growing out of the chest cavity of a skeleton. And the skeleton had obviously decomposed, but still had a cap on it, and the cap was identified as the missing man from the First World War. And the thought was he'd gone for a walk there, accidentally slipped, fallen off the hillside there, cracked his head, either died there or shortly afterwards, but it had an apple with him, and the apple had subsequently fertilized, grown, and grown up through him. Now, again, with the benefit of folklore and doing research, I know there are variations of that tale to be found elsewhere. But, for me then, I mean, there's two things there. One, how widespread that tale must have been. But again, for me as a child hearing that was one of those jaw-dropping moments. I mean,
did you go for your walk after that?
No, I didn't actually. I thought, no.
Oh, I mean, I'm honest. I mean, if I was, someone expressed that to me now, I would say, hell yeah, let's go. But I have to tell you, even as what I call myself a paranormal child, I wouldn't have gone. Especially if a respected and peer-related family member like a grandmother had told this, I would take that as an omen, as a warning.
Exactly. And that was my view. That was going up there might not be such a good idea, and there are plenty of other places.
It may not be really about the gentleman, the brother, and the apple and the apple tree, but it may be that the grandmother, because I've done this many times with my children, the grandmother is aware of something, don't go there, but doesn't quite know. So we'll come up with a narrative to say, well, do you know what? Just to not say you can't do it or don't do it, but it's like a narrative, just think about it. Because the grandmother is, I've had this, fully aware, do not go there. But you can't say sometimes to a child, don't go there. Why? I don't know. So I would come up with some sort of narrative I think that's beautiful. I think that's Wonderful. And I'm so glad you didn't go up there and turn into an apple tree.
Yes.
So moving on, I mean, so we've grasped the richness of your younger childhood. What comes next? What comes next, Charles?
Well, I suppose what comes next, I was then a teenager in the 1960s and more interested in pop music and girls. And so things drifted that way. But I had got an interest in, and it may well have been the way the book industry was, but there were an awful lot of ghost stories and horror stories being published in, I think it was Pan paperbacks. It was a sort of golden era for it in the 1960s. And there was a large covered market in the town, and there were, shops there selling secondhand books. So again, myself and my father were consuming large numbers of these books. So I think the horror style of and ghosts and supernatural mystery element got in, and the newspapers as well were quite interested in that. I remember there'd still be stories, even though it was long dead then, of Aleister Crowley, the famous occultist.
Yes.
And because we had Queen Elizabeth on the throne, and her mother was the Queen Mother, and she was from the Bowes-Lyons family.
Yeah.
Every so often, the legends of Glamis Castle would come out, and the secret room, and was there a deformed monster ancestor of the royal family there, and all of these things.
I just think it was just one of the disabled family members. That's what I think. That's what I thought. It wasn't, because we found, I know we've digressed slightly, but it happens on my show. We found out later on how the Queen Mother, hid one of her sisters in a mental asylum. And do you remember that? Or some family? Yeah. And there
was a young, a son of, or somewhere around about George the Fifth. I think he had a brother as well who was...
and they would lock him away in mental asylums so no one would know that. Through inbreeding, obviously, we knew why that. But so I digress, but it's very fascinating. So let's come back.
You were exposed to it. And then, again, the Irish comedian. Now, you're going to have to help me with this.
The one with the missing finger?
That's the one.
He was hilarious. He would tell ghost stories.
He did. He used to do on his show at the end, he would take down the lighting.
Yeah.
We're both scratching our heads for
it.
My
God, I can visualize him and his missing finger. I was riveted to, oh my God. Hold on, I'm going to Google it. I'm Googling it on the show. You tell me about him while I see if I can
Well, I say, he would do the show, and it was a comedy show, and he was part of his act. He'd dim the lights, and straight to camera, he would tell a ghost story. And they were very effective because there was no special effects or anything on it. It was just somebody telling it. And again, Dave Allen. That was it.
Got it.
Yeah. And I say, yes, brilliant comedian. Yeah. But I say he used to do that. And then, if you recall, the BBC were doing their Ghost Story at Christmas series, which were in black and white. And the M.R. James tales, Whistle and I'll Come for Thee, My Lad, with its imagery, again, very striking, all of those. And I say, we were taking them in. And I suppose I grew up with that interest, if you like. My interest in the supernatural had been whetted.
Yes, by family and culture, and then, as you said, as you got older, We all go through the sex, drugs, and rock and roll, whatever you do. It doesn't matter if you've admitted one. But then the reality seems to reflect then what we've experienced. And so instead of like an inward, which I'd call family, local, then it starts to, your reality then starts to reflect externally, like the Dave Allen show or the newspaper. So it's like it's just gently bringing you into, you know, and keeping this, like, I don't know, you can call it a passion. I think it must be a passion if we start in childhood and then we're still carrying on in maturity, darling, as we are. So you can see how that now comes towards you from newspapers, TV shows, especially Dave Allen. He used to scare, I'm sorry, he used to scare me shitless sometimes. He was a really good storyteller.
He was, indeed.
He really was. He really was. I think more so, I preferred his storytelling to being a comedian. Because
I have to say, I remember his storytelling. I could not remember any of his
jokes,
comedy skits or anything like that.
I can't remember the joke. But the storytelling, his presence, he had that presence. When he told a story, you knew it was him. You were waiting for something to come out, but you would then get lost in the tale and forget he was the comedian and forget who he was. And it was enthralling. That's how I describe it. And then all of a sudden you go, wow! It's at the end. He was brilliant. He was
brilliant.
Yeah.
But I suppose it's that those things I was picking up on.
Yeah.
You know, I'm going back to the 60s again. There's a Bonzo Dogs song about the strange boy at school who didn't like sport. I was that person.
Yeah.
Never read the sport pages of a newspaper in my life. Never watched sports program. Never, doesn't interest me at all. But something that's spooky, mysterious, something of that nature, then I'd be intrigued.
Yeah.
And I say, my family they all had an interest in history.
Yeah.
And so I was ingrained with it. And the place we live, Scarborough, for those of you who don't know it, there's a castle headland that dominates the two bays. It's been excavated, and before the Norman castle was there was a Roman signal station there. And before the Roman signal station, there was a settlement of Celts, the Beaker folk. They were there. There was a very early Christian chapel there. The Vikings came and burned the place down.
As they
do.
Yeah.
And so, you couldn't hide from, if you like, the history of the place.
I've said this before when we spoke before.
Yeah.
As you narrated some of these stories to me and tales, and it was like, like we have in spirituality, you have sacred spots. It could be Stonehenge, it could be the pyramid. And as you were telling me before, I kept saying, it seems like that geographical area holds an energy that is just so powerful, that it is paranormal energy. And it is, for me, that's beautiful. I mean, who knows? One day, maybe I'll come to Scarborough Fair. Who knows? However, but that's how it resonates with me.
Yeah.
It's rich and fertile history, but it's not just the history in the history books. It's a living history still to this day, is it not?
It is. It is. And yes, I mean, very much a ritual landscape, if you like, and moving south just a few miles onto what are called the Yorkshire Wolds, that is full of old burial mounds, tumuli. A lot of them have been lost to ploughing, but there are still the remains of some big ones there.
It's a history. I mean, I could stay just here, but we can't because we've got so much to pack in here. So what comes next? Is it the writer and the journalism, or is it the barrister? Where does that come in?
Well, I suppose the next bit is I left home and went to university.
Mm.
And then with guy who I was sharing a house with, as you did in those days, you rented a house and 4 or 5 of you would be in there sharing the rent. We used to go ghost hunting around the Leeds and West Riding area.
Hold on. What were you studying at university?
Funnily enough, I was studying politics.
I mean, this is what I needed to bring out.
Yeah.
So now, after all of that, okay, I'm going to study politics at university, and then you come up and say, well, actually, we went off ghost hunting. So I just want to express how it still comes in and feeds the narrative for your journey.
Yeah.
Do go on.
Yeah. Not quite sure why I chose politics with hindsight as opposed to history or anything else, but the course was a nice mix, if you like. Of it was mainly modern history, actually. The course. Anyway, and we used to go ghost hunting, and we would stake out old churches that were said to be haunted, visit sites that were said to be haunted, and essentially spent a lot of time sitting out in the cold in the middle of winter, and we saw nothing, unfortunately. But we tried.
You were training.
Yeah, we were training.
Yeah.
And I mean, the spooky element remains because Leeds University, the core part of it's expanded a lot since my day, was built around an old graveyard. Mm-hmm. And there were halls of residence on one side, science labs on another side, library on another side, but there was this anomalous space in the middle that was a graveyard. That was a graveyard up until the early 20th century, I think. It ceased being used. So
you even went to the right university. You even went to, I mean, you've got to say, well, hindsight's a bitch. Let's look back. So, you go to university, you're for some unknown reason, you're going for politics, it just attracted you. But it seems like that attracted you to get you into that space. Then you're into a university that just, happens to have this ancient graveyard there. And you just happen to go off doing ghost hunting. Yep. You can see how this unfolds within your lifetime. Yeah.
Yeah. And, go places like Ilkley Moor, which has a lot of mysterious standing stones and carved stones. Again, we're talking Neolithic era, 3,000 years ago, located there. And we did a one of the porch watching. Have you heard of the concept of porch watching, where you sit in
aware of it, but not in great detail?
You sit in a church porch, and I'm not sure if I'm trying to remember which day it was. I think it's the day that the church is the Saints' Day, relating to that particular church. Mm-hmm. And this was a St. Michael, and St. Michael, I think, he's got a couple of festivals. Anyway, doesn't matter. But the idea is that you sit in the porch on this specific night, and between the hours of 11 at night to 1 in the morning, legend has it, you will see a parade of, I suppose there'd be doppelgangers coming into the church, and they are all the people who are doomed to die over the next 12 months and will have their funerals and be buried in the churchyard there. And this used to be a thing. It seems to be a more of a northern thing, but porch watching was a big feature, and
Can you imagine? I mean, I obviously I spent most of my childhood and early years and raised all my children in graveyards. Never would I do a porch watch or anything like that. Never. I mean, because I've always had this sort of like, I don't want to know when the time's up. Because if I know when the time's up, I'm not going to enjoy the journey. So,
yes.
So I would never, even to this day, if you said, Gloria, come on, let's go, let's do a porch, I would say you can just get on that camel and ride off, because I wouldn't want to know, because there would be there is an excitement in me that would go, oh, I'd love to do that. But however, I think that would just play with my my brain and my mind, and then I'd focus on, oh my God, I'm going to. So no, but it is tantalizing thought, and I can understand back in the day, and when you go back in history, why people did what they did. I mean, they didn't have internet, they didn't have some of them didn't have books, they had no money, and they had the storytelling. Or maybe when we were younger, we'd go apple scrumping. I know I did. Illegal. It's illegal. I did it. And we'd do things like that. And some areas, they would go and invent their games. And, it's quite possibly that there were some kids and they went, you know what? Let's see, and it could have started off watching the dead, because, yes, you can be in a graveyard. And if you are tuned in to the spirit world, you can see them all bloody walking in and out. I have to tell you, I took someone to a graveyard recently for sort of, it's like an initiation just to feel the spirit. And I'm stood there and I was seeing 18th century walking. But I'm so used to that. So I can then imagine how that would have come about, and like Chinese whispers. But it's rich. I would say it's rich cultural living history that still exists, and it's magical for children especially. I think it's beautiful. But I'm weird, so it's okay. So right, we've got to the porch watching. We still got a long way to go. So we're into politics, so we think.
Yeah.
Where does this barrister come in? What happens?
Well, I realized once I'd got my politics degree, I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do next. Obviously needed to earn some money at some point, and it's not something that you write to the House of Commons and say, I've got a degree in politics, can I become an MP? Well, the world wasn't work like that.
No.
I don't think I particularly wanted to be an MP. I had met quite a few during my time at university and reinforced my opinion of them, which continues to be at a very low level through to the present day.
Yes.
So I wasn't quite sure what to do, but I'd already started doing some writing at the time for university newspapers and things of that nature. And I suppose realized I had a kind of analytical mind, that I could take a number of diverse facts and string them together to make a story.
Yeah.
And somebody, in those days, it was always get a profession behind you. And the idea of becoming an accountant just didn't appeal to me.
Oh, God, no.
Or, a surveyor or something.
No. I did like architectural surveying. I did touch upon that because I'm an artist. I love doing the design and work. That I did. But however, I do agree with you. I do agree. Boring careers.
And I didn't want to be particularly a sort of solicitor working in an office selling houses, which is what they largely did in those days. And again, I suppose the idea appealed to be a barrister. You dress up in a wig and gown.
That says a lot there. Yes, I hear you.
And there's the history element, the Inns of Court that you're a member of. And so I studied. I also had the advantage that because of the course I'd done at university, I was exempt a number of
modules
for being a barrister. So I could do it slightly more leisurely.
Yeah.
So I opted to be a barrister, and in due course I became a barrister. I was called to the bar, as it's called, and I practiced for a couple of years and realized I'd made the wrong decision. This really wasn't for me. It was
again. However, let's digress slightly here. You wore the wig, didn't you?
I did.
You did. And when you first put that wig on, I bet that felt good.
It did. Oh, yeah.
I mean, that's what it's about. You did all of that just to get that bloody wig on. However, I'm going to stay there slightly is I think the history of law, because obviously I studied criminology and
yes,
I found not so much the political part of it, but the history of, these beings, these people years ago, and how they went about, and the power they had, these barristers were. So I would have, been really interested in the historical, when did the barrister begin? And I would have loved that narrative. So I can understand, because I do have a fascination for certain history, I can understand why that would entice you in. Not just dressing up, wearing a wig.
Oh yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yeah. But I say, as you say, the history, I was then living in London, and I practiced in a set in Gray's Inn, and that whole area of Holborn and the edge of the city of London, again, is thick in history.
Yes.
And interesting history. The middle and inner temples, which are barristers' sets, are built around the Templar Church.
Yes,
and you've got that element of it.
Yes.
It's a very ancient part of London that's unchanged, and that was fascinating. But I say,
I can imagine that especially the Templars,
around there, and there's just up the road, it was still relatively novel. It's now been completely redeveloped and preserved in a far better way, but there was the Temple of Mithras that was found, and all the stories around St. Paul's and Ludgate Hill and things. So you were steeped in history, and
when you
of a mysterious type of history.
When you say steeped in history, coming from my truth is, it's not just the history, it's the vibration, the energy, the living experience. I have been in those areas. Obviously I'm actually come from Chelsea, Kensington. However, I'm very posh, as you can tell. But I always keep going back to the geographical location, like with, your childhood home. In that area in London, there is an energy, there is a narrative, there is a live experience that's continually evolving. And I think we can learn a lot. And it's fascinating because it's so mysterious. And which we love mystery, which is we love the paranormal. The paranormal is just another word for mystery. I suppose we could say that. So I can imagine how you with your wig on, I'm going to really rip you apart forever now, wearing your wig. I've never wore a wig. Anyway, I can imagine how that would enrich you and infuse you. And it would only encourage me to go deeper into mysteries or paranormal. So now wear this barrister. Last time, guys, with a wig.
Yep.
What comes after that?
Well, I discovered, much as it was fascinating, the tradition of the law, it really wasn't a profession for me. It was, how can I put it? It was too brown nosing. It was very much connections, deference, barristers kowtow to QCs, QCs kowtow to judges,
Who
judges,
you know, not what you know.
yeah, kowtow to higher level judges, and
Yeah.
so on all the way up.
Mm.
And it was just not me. It was just I realized it was wrong.
Okay.
So through circuitous routes, namely drinking in a drinking den in Fleet Street called the City Golf Club, which I should stress has nothing to do with golf and is nowhere near any golf. I met a journalist, and he suggested a couple of things that I might be able to write about. And so I became eventually a freelance journalist.
Yeah.
And I would write about everything and anything.
Yeah.
And I suppose one of my more interesting gigs was I used to write a legal column for a weekly magazine for doctors.
Yeah.
And we'd occasionally go off and I would write about doctors as murderers. And there are an awful lot of classic cases up there. And I wrote, and then I got involved with computer technology. These were the days when the first PCs were coming out, things like the Commodore PET. And
dial up, get off the phone. I'm trying to connect to the internet. Put the phone down. I remember.
That's it. Yep, exactly.
Yeah.
And I then made a career for myself, basically putting the two sides of my knowledge together, my writing skills plus my legal knowledge. I became a specialist in technology for lawyers, technology for barristers, technology for solicitors, and launched a newsletter about it, and then did that for a very long time. And I suppose that was, if you like, the rude appearance of the day job squeezing out a lot of other interests. And so I'm afraid the ghost hunting and the interest in the occult was always there, but actively pursuing it was not an option because there just weren't enough hours in the day. And it happens to a lot of people. The day job gets in the way. You're worrying about paying the mortgage and things of that nature. And so it all slightly went away. And it wasn't until much later, so we've chopped a large lump out of the history here, but it wasn't until much later that I then had time to start once more exploring it. And I wrote fiction, ghost stories, horror stories, and the like. You
basically become a storyteller.
Yes.
So we're now at the storyteller. So we're like 1, 2, 3, 4. We're number 5 in the storyteller with the weird tales for the weird time.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it all follows through the storytelling because when you're a journalist, you're telling a story. You've got to keep the reader interested, carry the story through. When you're a barrister and you're doing your summing up for the jury, you are telling a story and you want them to believe your story and it to be more convincing than the other side's story.
Absolutely, because it could be a true story or fictional. Either way, it's storytelling.
It's storytelling. So, it follows the way through. And anyway, I wrote about those things. And then I started writing nonfiction and going back to some of the stories from my youth and where I grew up and exploring the areas where I grew up and putting them together as a book and talking about them. And then I got approached by various online magazines to write for them on a regular basis about such matters, ghostly, witchcrafty, spooky, folklore, paranormal. And then I was doing that. I then, for a number of years, I've now recently stopped it to focus on other projects, but I was running a weekly podcast about the paranormal and folklore.
Yeah.
And then, as this is another element, I suppose, that I've noticed as a writer or storyteller, your medium changes with time.
Yes.
So when I first started, it was everything was written on a typewriter,
Yes.
and I'd keep a carbon copy, and I would deliver the hard copy to the newspaper they would use. Then we moved to computers, and I would send floppy disks, and then internet, and then the written word gives way to the spoken word with podcasting. And more recently, I've now started experimenting, doing some YouTube videos, but I've also got a number of book projects on, which again are of folklore, legends, ghosts. And I'm now writing a book as well, looking at sorcerers and witches through history and biographical details. So I'm doing that. So the storytelling, the writing, all of those elements are following through. But I suppose the key thing is, for me, looking back, none of it was planned. I didn't sit down and say, right, I'm going to go to university and I'm going to get a degree and I'm going to become a chartered accountant and eventually I will have my own practice and I will make a lot of money. That was never the issue. And indeed, I realized there are several points in my career when I could have gone another way and made a shed load of money, but they just didn't appeal to me. Or
no, I hear you.
It wasn't me. And so life has been a rolling journey where I've never quite known where I'm going next, or what the future holds.
Excuse me. I mean, obviously, I do resonate with that as well, because I was just thinking before we come on to record the Zoom, and just thinking, as you do, I was looking at the tree outside the window, and I'm in a village, it's quiet, and it just, how the hell did I get here? What I'm doing a podcast. Who would? And I said, wow. And then you start going, oh yeah, that one. So listening to your journey, which is just so fascinating, and we couldn't go into all of it. You can just see how it just evolved. Yeah. And all of, I always say, by going to university and doing, myself, the youth justice system, social science and criminology and psychology, they were just skill sets for the mind I was picking up, like a training. I never, ever was going to go off and be this one in a million criminologist or whatever, Trevor, or change the world that way. I had an awareness I wasn't going to be, but I knew I needed for some reason these skill sets. All of the skill sets that I've had are now transferable, and I've transferred them to this stage. And I can see how, going through your university years, your politics and, the barrister and wearing the wig. I'm never going to let that go now. But them skill sets, because it's very similar to, as with what I've gone through, is when I'd write, reports or child protection reports or whatever I was writing for. It was telling a story, telling a narrative, but in a very, context and precise way. It had to flow. So it's, to be presented, it had to have some form of professionalism and big words. Going to university is like learning a new language. I recall that. So all of your skill sets that you went through, from politics to being a barrister, they're transferable skills that you've taken now back into the work that you're doing. Does that resonate with?
It does. No, that's exactly it. And I suppose one of the things I've always found exciting, and one of the reasons why possibly I have chopped and changed and moved around, is I like to be able to get up in the morning and think, now, what's going to happen today?
Yes.
I don't want to know it's going to be the same as yesterday and the day before and the same as the last 20 years.
No, have that. No. Yeah, I agree with you. I get up and I go, please, I don't want a Groundhog Day.
Yeah.
It is a sort of Groundhog Day in a way, but it's not, because I do say, right, what am I going to experience today? What's going to happen? Is it going to be shit? Is it going to be good? Is it going to be light bulb moment? But I'm ready for the experience. So I resonate with that too, that you're at a point now. I can't say I'm always going to be a podcast host. I had no idea I was coming here to do this. And that excites me. So it basically is the mystery of my human experience now. It's a paranormal human experience, and it's a mystery because I don't know the ending.
Yep.
And in fact, when you look back in hindsight, we never knew where we were going to go. Does that make sense? We just flowed it.
Yeah. I mean, I did that with the podcasting. I thought, it'll, maybe a few weeks or something, but I did it for 4.5 years.
Yeah.
Then I thought, I've been doing this too long. Yeah. One of the things I do recognize is that with some of the work projects I did with the, if you like, the day job, I did stay too long and I should have got out sooner. Yeah. And I'm always conscious I don't want to do something and then become stale. Yeah. So, I decided to pull the rug on it and move on to try something else.
Yeah.
And I've always been a firm believer that as one door closes, another one opens.
Yeah.
But if you aren't prepared to close that door behind you, you don't see any future opportunities because you're blocking yourself out. You're not allowing yourself the time. I couldn't possibly do that. How would I find the time? Well, that's because you're not making the jump. You've got to have, I suppose, a leap of faith and say, it's time to go on and move and try and do something else.
I mean, many times we don't even have a conscious awareness we're doing that. And I will say again, hindsight's a bitch, and I can look back and go, well, I never made a decision to move from that job, to that field, to this field. How did that happen? And I'm going, you could say there was maybe a reality issue. It could be a divorce. It could be this. You can see that. But I don't remember I'm going to shut the door on this. For my truth is, like, I've done many projects in my life, and I get this feeling. You touched upon it. Is I felt that I was stagnating. So I didn't make a conscious decision. I need to go and find. So I had to come to the realization that I wasn't feeling it anymore. There was something, and me being me, I'd say, okay, guys, guide, show me synchronicity. Whatever it is. I think when you try to control shutting that door, then sometimes you may go through a period of turbulence because I don't know, maybe it could be a load of bullshit I'm saying, but my truth is it has to be an organic, natural recognition. Okay, this is not serving me no more. I don't want to experience this no more.
Yeah.
So does that resonate with you?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. Yes, it's not as if, I did meet a guy and he actually was an accountant, though he was working in a slightly different area. I mean, my thing about accountants is a bit like yours with my wig.
Yes.
But he'd actually drawn up a schedule of how he saw his life progressing with sort of targets. By the age of 40, I will be doing this. By the age of 50, I'll be doing this, by this. And, something came along and completely blew it all out of the water. And he was definitely lost. He got his plan, but I'm supposed to be doing this now. No, you're not. That's the thing.
I mean, the universe will stop you if you're trying to control your life. There is an element of control. There is that normal, natural, organic control. But if you're really trying to control, you're going to lose. I mean, these people that that I'm going to be this and I'm going to be that. You may slowly get there, but the higher you go, the harder you fall, because you're trying to control the situation that you really should not be controlling. There are elements of control. Yes, we can marry who we want if we, and sometimes you think, oh, I've got the love of my life. And then you go, fuck, no, I need a divorce. We always think we know what's best. I always come from, maybe it's old school. It's like, I have, in my experience, tried to control situations, and that was a waste of time. However, the more organic you are, the more you let it flow. Okay, like we said, what am I going to experience today? This arises. Wow, what's going to happen? And if you're open to whatever comes to you, first you've got no fear, then you've got no, I've got this long-term outcome like your accountant, and you can then, let's say, animate it and play with the experience and enjoy and go. Then you can go, no, but it's not a negative. It's not pushing you back, or because I always say, if you set your goals in the future, it's a waste of time. Okay? Because by the time you get to this linear future, you're going to be thinking of the next future, and you're going to be missing every goddamn experience that you should be experiencing. Does that resonate with you?
Definitely. Yeah. No, I've always believed that's not quite live in the moment, but certainly live in the here and now, rather than I will do this and I will not have fun during my life because I'm going to save up and then I'm going to go on a cruise when I retire.
Yeah.
And
when you retire, you drop dead.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
You don't get the cruise.
Yes.
Because, I mean, but many people still do this. And if they're free choice to do that, and if they wish to do that, then that's their choice. However, I watched, coming from my age, which we are similar again. We're not Victorian, by the way, even though he wears a wig. And I saw my elders back in the day, you need to do this and you've got to set that and you need to. And for me, never fitting into this world, I thought, God, that's boring. Where's the excitement if you know what's coming? And then half the time I'd watch the elders divorce, die, bankruptcy, and all of these, why has this happened? And so it was like on the job through the human experience, by observing others and how it played for them, being a youngster. I thought, well, I don't fit in here. That doesn't fit for me. So I'd be more of an organic, often fucked it up and often made the wrong decision and gone down, the wrong path. Only come back to our side. But that's the journey. That's the
exactly.
Experience.
Yeah.
It is. So as we come to the conclusion of this, is just a fascinating podcast, and we're going to have to do another one, and we're really going to go a deep dive on something paranormal, because I love the paranormal, as I would. So where are you at now? Sell your wares shamelessly. You may put the wig on as well. Where are you now? What are you creating now? What's your project? And if people are interested in your books or your writings or any more in you, sell yourself on the show.
Right. Well, my current book, I'm just going to pop out and show you the book.
That's it. And I am here, home alone. My guest has left the room. And I'm going to admire his magnificent fireplace over there. Right, he's back. I was admiring your fireplace.
I'm back. My current book is this one. It's called Shuckland. Haunted Landscapes. Wow. And I'm turning it the wrong way.
There you go.
And this is going to be a series, and it's really picking up what we were talking about earlier about places that are steeped in atmosphere, ritual, magic.
Oh, yes.
There's a history to them. They're places where, I suppose the phrase I use is a sort of axis of weird. You think, how did this place that's a relatively small part of the country nobody's ever heard of.
Yeah.
How did it get to be like this? And it just looks at them all and brings everything together.
Yeah.
And
Wonderful.
what intrigues me is how it, once you start scratching the surface, just how much there is there. That is the book. It's available on Amazon, and it's also available in various bookshops. There will be more of those coming out, but my immediate project is a book called All of Them Witches, which is an almanac of witches and sorcerers, but giving some historical context.
Now I'm excited. Yeah.
Going way back to ancient times.
That's
also featuring more modern practitioners.
Yeah. I mean, I'm into the ancient. I remember, through my journey, and I used to research, and I was fascinated. I mean, maybe because I was a medium, which is the same thing as a witch, I suppose. The oracles of Delphi, Delphi. I'd go everywhere, and I would read everything, and I would just say, "Oh, I love this," and I had this love to hear all these stories and what they would do and how they would come to the oracle. And I remember someone was trying to poo-poo, because to me it's all true. Sorry, I'm still a child. And someone wrote something years ago, I can't even recall, and good job I haven't remembered their name, so that's good, because they don't deserve it. And it was about the oracle of Delphi or somebody, or Mithras, or one of them.
Yeah.
And the magic, and it was just so beautiful. And this so-called, scientific whatever, Trevor come up and said, well, the reason that this happened is because in the geology of the landscape, there was this chemical coming out, and he went all down that road. And I'm telling you, I want to say,
yes.
Why are you taking the magic out? It's the magic that's real, because we are magical beings. We can interact with this. So that's going to be a fantastic book, and I want one.
Right. I shall get you one. The other thing I've got to finish writing it first. No pressure. The other thing I'm doing are a series of short YouTube videos, and you can find them on YouTube on Weird Tales Show, which is the name of the channel.
Okay.
And shortly, later today, there's a new one going up, which is about the witches of Thrandurston, which is a little place.
Hold on. I'm not a very good researcher. Could you please say the name of that channel again? Because I know what I'm viewing today.
Weird Tales Show.
Right. Weird Tales
Show.
I know who you are with the wig on, so I'm going to be on the YouTube.
Yeah.
I'm going to.
And I say there's one there about the witches of Thrandurston, which is a church where they have carvings of two witches there. Ooh. And looking at the background and the tie-in with the Lowestoft witch trials in the 17th century.
Wow.
And there's even a connection with Salem and the witch trials there.
Wow. Now, I have researched that. And a couple of years ago, I'm in Buckinghamshire. So I'm in one of the villages in Buckinghamshire. But a couple of years ago, some friends of mine who were mediums, witches, whatever you want to call them, they took me, I can't remember the place, but it's in Buckinghamshire. And they took me to this area, and there was a pond, there was an old pub, and it was a ducking pond.
Mm.
And in this area where they would duck the witches, and there's a lot of history. But at the time, I didn't have, there wasn't enough hours in the day. I want to go there, but I can't, because I've got to work. I've got to do this. I've got to raise my children. I've got to, but I am aware. And one day when there are more hours in a day, I would love to get, the history on that. So if you ever find anything about the local area in Buckinghamshire of witches, there were witches trials. And, in this area, it's got a lot of history here. We had the Knights Templars here, by the way, because I found them, researched them in the archives, found their names and everything. We've got a lot of history here. that no one's, apart from weirdo me, seems to be interested in. And I would, if anyone finds any history of witches and warlocks and wizards and, and another one I've got to say before we close, because I'm just now I'm in my passion. I believe in Merlin. I'm so sorry. I think it's just the Chinese whisper, slightly changed. I believe because I've witnessed spiritual alchemy for real, that is scientifically proven by quantum physics. So now I can look back at all these beautiful stories and what you call mysteries and say, well, now I can validate that. It wasn't mythology. And when I studied mythology, the Greek gods, I fell in love with them. I was like, oh my God, they have these superpowers. But now I can look up and say, the mythology is the truth. That's the truth, and the other's the lie. And you can see how the current modern historical narrative has attempted, and very successfully in a lot of places, taken away the truth of the expression of being a human being here on this wonderful planet, and how connected through mythology we were to nature. Does that make sense to you? Well, I'm ranting off here, but
it does. Yeah. Now I know we're drawing to the end of the show, but I just thought I would just
carry on
you, because I still have it here.
Your wig.
The wig.
Oh my God! Oh, come on! You've got to do it just for me. Come on,
right?
Come on, Charles. See. Here we go. Do I call you your lordship? What do I call you? Oh my gosh! Oh my lord! Oh, get it right, darling. Get your wig on.
There we are.
Right. Do I call you your lordship? No, you don't wear it to the side.
No, you don't. No, you don't call me my lordship.
What do I call you? If you were a practical barrister?
I think you just the way barristers do it. Actually, they refer to themselves by their surnames. This is the tin the wig comes in.
So you would call yourself J.C. Christian Esquire?
That's the title. There's a whole history to there's a whole history to the Esquire thing as well.
Yeah.
Which is
when you name yourself, do you have to put a plum in your mouth? There's me, born in Chelsea, Kensington.
No, you don't.
Darling.
No, you don't.
I know how to be posh, darling. My birthright. Yeah. Wow. How did that make you feel? I don't know. I just could never. I've never want to attain to such human grandiose. Really, I've always wanted to pull off a barrister's wig since childhood. Maybe one day we'll go and adventure in your lands. You can take me on a spooky panel and we'll video it. Oh, we can go spooky. And you'll put your wig on, and I've always wanted two things to do. This is still the child in me. Pull off a barrister's wig.
Yeah.
Because through studying law, the law is corrupt.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. And knock a policeman's helmet off, but an old school bobby.
I know. Yeah.
Did you ever want to go? Because they would grab you as children and go and they, So I've always wanted to do that.
Yeah. I never had that opportunity as a child because the local police in Scarborough, Yorkshire, they all wore the flat caps. They didn't wear the pointed bobby ones. So
that's where you make the country bread, isn't it? Is it Tetley or somebody or the foreign parts of it? In London, they had these like beacons.
Oh yeah.
And they all walked all the same. And as a child, many of, I think my brother did it once, God rest his soul. I think, and he did it when he was older, actually. He knocked their hats off, yes, got arrested for it. But however, it was a thing I loved. It was a giggle to knock one of their, and back in the day, you never went to prison, you never went to court. If you did something cheeky, and they knew, in London children especially, They knew you were just daring. You'd been dared by the group, the gang, and others would go and do something to a Bobby, and they'd chase you. You got away if they couldn't run very fast, because we knew the back streets of London. We knew the underground. We knew where to go. They had no idea. So it's just one of my weird things that have come out. And I'm going to pull your wig off. Yep. You know what, Charles? It has been a fascinating show, and I'm so grateful for you coming on.
No, it's been my pleasure, Gloria.
And
I enjoyed it totally.
And I'm going to have you back on. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah.
It's been a great conversation, and I hope you've all enjoyed the show as much as I have. It's not always all about me, but it's fascinating. And you can get hold of Charles's books and to find out more. And I'm going to stalk Charles on the YouTube channel. I'm going to get myself up to watch these and give my critique. And until next time, everybody, thank you for watching Inception Podcast Special. And remember, guys, on the Forbidden Knowledge News Network, it's bye for now.